Hey everybody, how goes it? Welcome to the Wednesday night live stream. Hope you're doing great. Grab yourself a cup of coffee, settle in for a few minutes. If you're just stopping by, scrolling along Facebook or YouTube or whatever, thanks for stopping for a sec. And what we're doing here is the Wednesday night live stream. I'm Ben Cotton. Nothing special about me. I just every Wednesday night like to get on and look at some scripture together, talk about stuff. Lately, what we've been doing is just going through the book of Psalms. I started this like this summer, stopped for a while, now picked it back up, and we're actually almost done. So we're just reading a Psalm every day. And then each week I just pick one out of the 7 readings for that week to talk about on Wednesday night, and just try to pick some that are either meaningful to me or seem relevant, particularly relevant for what's going on in the world or at the moment. And it's just been great for me anyway. I hope it's been good for you. So let me just show you the schedule so you can kind of have an idea of how that's been going. We're in week 20, which is Psalms 134 to 140. And I'm picking Psalm 139 tonight to talk about. If you're following along, which you don't have to, but if you are and you'd like to keep up, just next week, or actually starting tomorrow, will be Psalms 141 through 147. As of tomorrow morning, if you're reading in the morning, Psalm 141 is your one. And then just read through to next week, and then Wednesday I'll pick one that you read this week. All right. So that's how that's going. So I hope you're doing great. And if you feel like it, hit the like button, subscribe, share. If you think this will be meaningful to somebody else, I recommend you do that. And also just want to encourage people to use the comments if you'd like prayer for something, or you just have a thought or an exhortation or encouragement for others. That's also pretty awesome and a great thing to do. It really is effective. I know it may seem like it's not, but I think it's one of those little things you can do to encourage other people along the way as they travel along the interwebs with the rest of us, right? So yeah, tonight we're looking at Psalm 139, and this will be just a few minutes. I try not to make these long. Hopefully they're not too long for you. And along those lines, I just want to solicit some feedback from those of you who watch these. You can just, leave a comment or email me or whatever. When we're done with this in a couple of weeks with the Psalm series, I want to change things up, but I'm not sure exactly how I want to do it. And so I'm just curious about what you guys would like. I mean, one option is we could do something more kind of interactive where we take questions through the comments. That would probably make this a little longer. I don't know if people want interactivity or if they just want to kind of watch passively, which is fine, right? I mean, I'm not really stuck on any format. So I'm just curious. I thought I'd ask if you have an opinion about that. Other things, just to do more topical things. Maybe get my wife Heather in here if she's willing. She really doesn't want to, but I think it would be great to have her voice. So, another option would be, instead of doing questions live, people could email me questions or topics ahead of time, and I could just pick one, which would make it a little more organized. Or I could do another book of the Bible. That would be fun. So yeah, there's just a million things we could do. I'm just not sure what people want, and what they're interested in, what makes you come and watch these to begin with. So yeah, so if you want some control over that, some input, have at it. Use the comments, or if you don't want to use that, you can email me, bcotton@livinghopetriad.com. I think my email just pops up here eventually on the screen. So yeah, if you care to have input, I would love to have it. Okay, so let's look at Psalm 139. Okay, so pull it up on the screen. We'll just take this in chunks. This is a familiar psalm to a lot of people. You'll recognize some of these phrases here in a minute, probably maybe all of them. These are the kind of verses that get stuck on t-shirts and bumper stickers and fridge magnets, right? Because there's just so many like little phrases that are so comforting and well put. This is explicitly noted as a Psalm of David. Okay, so that's helpful because you know David's background. If you don't, it's a great story. Go read 1st, 2nd Samuel to start with. Um, so here it is, verse 1. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. You search out my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. You hem me in behind and before, and lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high, I cannot attain it. So the first thing I notice is that David is kind of emotionally overwhelmed here, right? He says it's too high. I can't attain it. I can't wrap my head around what I'm seeing, what I'm feeling, and what I'm experiencing in my relationship with God. It's too much. It blows my mind, right? Right? He's saying my mind is blown. My heart is too small. My heart is overwhelmed. It's too wonderful for me. It's too high. I cannot attain it. And it's not, it's a very specific knowledge, a very specific observation that is overwhelming him, right? It's not just God in general. It's something about God that's so overwhelming and so beautiful and is blowing his mind. Okay. And what it is that he's known by God, but it's not just that he's known by God in this kind of abstract way, like a scientist observes something he's studying. David is totally known by God, completely in every way, down to his core. He's completely exposed to the God's gaze. Okay, God is looking at him, gazing upon David, and he sees everything about David. There is no aspect of David's physical, emotional, and mental person that is outside of God's view. That's crazy. That's amazing. And it's scary, kind of all at the same time, right? So what's true of David, that the thing that David sees about God, that God sees him, is also true of us. So stop and think for a minute. This is where you got to slow down when you read the Psalms, because this is beautifully phrased, short little few verses that we're meant to kind of slow down and try to experience the way David is, right? So think about how totally exposed you are right now to God. Think about what he knows about you, not just about what you've done or things you've said. Like I said, not just like this external scientific observer, but he knows you inside. He knows what's in your head. He sees you without any of the varnish and spin that you put on your persona to the world. Every corner of your mind, every corner of your body and your heart is completely exposed to him. He sees all of it. None of it's filtered. You're not in control of his perception of any of it. You can't make yourself look better or worse than you actually really are. He also sees you right now without any of the self-deception that you live in about yourself. That includes self-deception that's more negative than it should be, and self-deception that's more positive than it should be. God sees you just as you actually really are, in ways that not even you can see about yourself. And you're not in control of any of it. He sees, not because you've allowed him to see or have invited him to see you. He sees you because he's God. That's what David is getting kind of hit with. And hopefully you and I are getting hit with the same thing as we read this. Because it is a wonderful thing, as David says. It's a beautiful thing, as David says, but it's also pretty unnerving. I don't know. I hope I'm not the only one that feels that way when I really think about what David is saying here, just in these first 6, 7 verses. But it's a little unnerving to be that exposed, to be that vulnerable, to be that naked before God. before anyone, to be honest. David, I think, is also unnerved by this. In verse 5, I'll go back to it here. He says, you hem me in behind and before, and you lay your hand upon me. You hem me in. So David is saying this knowledge, this seeing that God has of me, my exposure to him is not just passive, but God's knowing of me hems me in. It restricts me. He keeps me from doing all the things that I want to do. He doesn't let me just run amok, right? He's hemmed me in. He has restricted my path, is literally what that means. You have restricted my path. You've hemmed me in. God's intimate seeing of you is not a passive stare, it's active. God is actively seeing you, and he is hemming you in. He is limiting your path. He has contained you inside of his will. That's the way I think I would like to put that, right? That's how I'd put it. God has contained you inside of his own will. So when God looks at you, he sees you, your whole self, unfiltered, unrestricted, unmitigated. He doesn't just observe you passively, he's actively in there, mixing it up and saying, nope, not there. Nope, not there. Go this way. Let's read on. Starting here in verse 7. Where shall I go from your spirit, or where shall I flee from your presence? So David's continuing this thought of you've hemmed me in. Okay, you can see where this thread has gone in verse 7 and 8. He says, where shall I go from your spirit, or where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you're there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you're there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. All right? There's that hem me in idea. He's holding you, leading you and holding you. Verse 11, if I say, surely the darkness shall cover me and the light about me be night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is bright as the day, for darkness is as light with you. In other words, there is just nowhere you can go. So if this feeling of this unnerved feeling of being exposed before God, like utterly, totally exposed in a way that is sort of beyond your control, beyond your ability to spin or mitigate or slow down or hide some part of yourself from him, if that makes you afraid and makes you want to run, well, I think David felt maybe that way too, at least on some level. And then he says, but you know what? Where am I going to go? Where am I going to run? There is no place I can go to hide from the gaze of God upon me. There's just not. He's too big. He's too wonderful. He's too great. This makes me think about, if you ever held like a gerbil, my kids have had gerbils, little, like, I don't know, domesticated rats. I don't know what else a gerbil is, but have you ever held one in your hand and they do this funny thing where they try to run away, and it's this tiny little thing in your hand and it tries to run away, and you just can kind of turn your hand around, right? And it just keeps running and running and running, and you keep moving your hand around and it gets nowhere. And it's just trying so hard to escape your hand, but it can't, right? And it's kind of funny and silly, and this silly animal that has the gerbil, his world is so much smaller than your world, and he has no idea. So he thinks, well, I can just run from here to there and be away from this threat that I perceive. But he doesn't realize is that your world is so much bigger than his world that there is no escape, right? And this is how, I think this is what David is describing here. Like, we're the gerbil and God is God, and God's world is infinitely bigger than ours, not just by an order of magnitude, but infinitely bigger than our little world. His control, his knowledge, his insight, his power, everything is so infinitely greater than ours. Yet so the very idea that we could just run to the other side of the planet to escape him, or run to our bedroom, or run on vacation, or run here, run there, hide here, is silly. It's silly when you see it from God's perspective. And that's part of what David is expressing here, is that idea that, man, I'm just a gerbil running around in God's hand. And he sees me so completely. The very idea that I could escape from his gaze is insane. So let's look at verse 13. This is where I think in David's process, or at least the process he's expressing here in the Psalm, is things turn away from this kind of unnerved kind of fear into something more intimate. Here's what he says. Verse 13, for you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. Wow. So God's knowledge of you, again, is not as an observer, it's as a creator. I love this idea, because think about, like, if you've ever made something with your own hands, or maybe just taken something apart completely and put it back together again. I think it's a similar experience. Have you ever made something with your own hands? You know, you have a knowledge of that thing that's more than just what you can get by observing or even studying it. You have an intimate kind of immediate knowledge of that thing and how each part fits together and what makes it function and what makes it break. You have this knowledge that is beyond just what you can get by even holding it and observing it. And this is how God is with us. He formed you, every part of you, physically, and emotionally, and your personality, and the way your mind works. He formed and shaped every aspect of who you are with his own hands. Just like if you made something with your hands, there's nothing you do not know or understand about that thing. The same is true of God about you, because he made you. And then David goes on to say, right? He says that you were, not only were you made by God, God has all this intimate, immediate knowledge about you and how you work and how you function, down to your molecules. It's themselves, right? Not only did he design you, but he designed your life. Hello. He designed you and the life you would live, every day marked out in front of you before you had a day. God designed and fashioned and shaped all of your days with his own hand, according to his own purpose, his own design, his own idea of what you should be and where you should be and what you should do and how you should feel. All these things, who you are, designed by him. God knows and directs your future with the same intimate knowledge that he knows and directs you. Nothing is unseen and nothing is undirected by him in your life. That's crazy. You start to see why David's mind is blown, right? Because God knowing you is more than just observing you and seeing you. God has his hands in the dirt of you all the time. It's crazy. All right, let's read on. Bringing in the close. Verse 17. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them. If I would count them, they are more than the sand. I awake and I am still with you. Oh, that you would slay the wicked, O God. O men of blood, depart from me. They speak against you with malicious intent. Your enemies take your name in vain. Do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord? And do I not loathe those who rise up against you? Search me, O God. Excuse me. I hate them with complete hatred. I count them my enemies. Wow. Does that mess with you a little bit? So there's a lot of things we could say about these verses. But probably the one that stands out to you as much as it does to me is this idea that David hates those that God hates. And it's like, man, isn't that a little strong? Like, I thought we weren't supposed to hate people. What's going on? So there's a few things we should say. One is, I think it's important to note that just on the surface of it, this defies the simplicity of a lot of the things that we tend to say and repeat, like hate the sin, not the sinner. Or it's never okay to hate. We need to be careful that we're not oversimplifying who God is. Okay. David is responding here to the holiness of God, and God has love for sinners, right? Matthew 5:45 is a good example. We could go all over the place. God has love for sinners. Okay. So let's not be simplistic. Okay. He also has hatred for sinners. Look at Psalm 5:4-6. And the verse we just read, the Psalm we just read, is another example of that. Right. So how do God loves sinners and hates them? Like, what's the deal? Part of the problem, I think, is that we tend to think of sin as something that is separate from ourselves. That's part of why we get confused by these different descriptions of God's relationship with sinners, with those who are, as David puts it, his enemies. That sin is not this sort of separate thing that we just do. Like, we're not just good people that sometimes do bad things. The deal with sin is, yes, it is something we do or fail to do, but sin is also more like an infection. Scripture describes sin that way also, that it's an infection that we are tainted by. We are permanently stained by sin. Jesus said a little bit of leaven or a little bit of yeast leavens the whole loaf, the whole batch of bread by a little bit of yeast. That's how sin works. It permeates the person. Your very nature is broken and distorted by sin. It's not just something that you can sort of extract from the individual and make it just something that you do that's not really you. I forgot myself and I didn't really mean it. No, sin is deeper and more terrible than that. It's why the language Jesus uses, you have to be born again. You have to start over. You have to be recreated. You can't just fix and tweak the human person and make them not sinful. They have to be reborn and recreated. All right. Because sin is like an infection in the whole body. Okay. So when we start to see that, you can start to see why it's simplistic to say things like hate the sin, not the sinner, as though they can be separated. Right? It's not that simple. The other problem, I think, is similar. We tend to think of God as part holy and part love, but not both in full measure at the same time. We think of God's holiness as sort of a part of him. The way we think about sin is like it's just a part of us. God's holiness is not just a part of him. It is all of who he is. He is fully holy, and he's also fully loving and fully merciful and fully just, all powerful, all knowing, gracious and merciful, all of these things, all at the same time, completely and totally, never putting one down to be the other. God is big and he's amazing. Okay. God is all of his attributes fully all the time. Okay. So David is not giving us a license to hate people we don't like. All right. So don't put those words in his mouth. That's not what he's saying. This isn't some personal vendetta for him. David isn't telling us everything we need to know about our response to evil and sin in the world. God is a forgiving God. He's full of grace and mercy. He died for us while we were still his enemies, right? But it's not so simple as we often make it. It's not so simple because when we are faced with real evil in the world, I think we all know that some things we should hate. Some things are actually evil, right? Some people do really evil things, and it's not wrong to hate that. We're not all God's children. There's real evil and real injustice in the world, and we should hate that, okay? I think that's what we can say about these verses, is that we should hate what God hates. We should love what God loves. This is complicated and difficult. But what David is looking at here is just saying, God, you're so holy. And because I'm so zealous for you, and I look at those who rise up against you and are doing wicked, evil things, he says here that these are bloodthirsty people in verse 19. They're bloodthirsty, wicked, unjust people. And David is fueled and motivated by his love for God and his love for God's greatness, right? All right, so what do we do with all this? There's a great quote by Tim Keller that I feel like I've used a lot, but I don't care. I just keep using it. It's from a great book Tim and his wife wrote, actually, about marriage. And here's what he says. I think this will help kind of bring this to a close. He says, to be loved but not known is comforting but superficial. To be known and not loved is our greatest fear. But to be fully known and truly loved is, well, a lot like being loved by God. It is what we need more than anything. It liberates us from pretense, humbles us out of our self-righteousness, and fortifies us for any difficulty life can throw at us. So I think this is helpful on a couple of levels. It's great about just thinking about marriage, but in this case, I think it helps us understand what in us kind of recoils at the idea of God knowing us so intimately and perfectly and totally. Because our fear, Tim Keller points out, our fear is that God will know us so intimately and then reject us because, or not love us, is probably a better way to put it, because of what he sees. But the truth is, he also points out, God knows us better than anyone can know us, and he loves us anyway. In fact, he doesn't just love us. What does he do? He dies for us. He comes and he becomes sin for us. He takes on our punishment, the burden of our sin on himself. He becomes sin so that we can become righteous. So here's the thing. When God looks at you and he sees you and all of you and all that you are, unvarnished, unfiltered, no self-deception, no spin, he doesn't just see you. He doesn't just see your brokenness and your rebellion, your bloodthirstiness, as verse 19 says. He also sees the righteousness of Christ. If you are in Christ, that's what God sees. He sees you. Yeah, he sees you. He's not lying to himself and pretending like you're not what you are. But when he looks at you, he also sees Christ. He sees the righteousness of Jesus Christ put on you. And so now he can be with you instead of, as David cries out, saying, oh, I smite him. Right? God looks at you and he would be right to smite you. Instead, he would be right to hate you because of your sin and rebellion against him. Instead, he loves you and dies for you. This is the gospel right here at that point of nervousness and wanting to run and hide from his gaze. At that moment is where the gospel is, where we say, oh, wait, I can run to him. Instead of running away, I can run into his gaze because he's not just seeing me, he's also loving me at the same time. So that brings us to this prayer at the end of this psalm, which I want to read. I just want to pray it together. And this will be my close, verses 23 and 24. And if you can, if you wear, just pray this with me. Don't just read this or listen to me read it. Pray it and ask God to do this, knowing that he loves you and knowing that he sees you. Let's invite him to search us. Here's the prayer. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any grievous way in me, and lead me in the way of everlasting. Amen. All right. Love you guys. Thanks for hanging out with me. Share it if you want to share it, like if you like it, and we will see you next Wednesday. And remember, give me some feedback if you want to about what keeps you watching this, what you'd like to see happen in the future when we're done with the next couple of weeks in Psalms. All right. See you guys.